He had dreamed about this moment since he was 10 years old. Not the contract, not the fame, but the look on his father's face. The truck pulled up slowly in front of a gated mansion on the edge of the hills, sunlight bouncing off the windows like gold. His dad stood frozen on the driveway, holding a coffee in one hand and disbelief in the other. "This yours?" he asked. "No," his son smiled, tossing him the keys. "It's yours." An hour later, he was on the court, running warm-ups before his debut playoff game. He felt light, unstoppable, as if life had finally aligned. The money, the purpose, the pride. Everything he had fought for now felt real. And then, in the third quarter, on a fast break, it happened. One wrong step, one sharp twist, one sound he'll never forget. He didn't scream, he didn't cry. He just stared at the ceiling of the arena, knowing with eerie clarity his season was over, maybe his career. And his father, still holding the keys to that mansion, would soon learn that dreams, no matter how big, always come with a price. He was born on the coldest January night Cleveland had seen in years. The hospital room was dim, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, as his father, Reggie, signed the birth certificate with grease still under his fingernails. The nurses smiled politely, but they didn't linger. Another black baby born into a city that rarely gave second chances. His mother left when he was 6, packing her things one morning without looking back. She'd grown tired of the broken promises, of poverty that clung like mildew in the walls. She said she was going to Atlanta to sing, but no one ever heard her voice again. From that moment on, it was just him and Big Reggie, a boy and a man trying to figure it out day by day. They lived in a one-bedroom apartment above Reggie's auto shop. It smelled like rubber and radiator fluid, the walls thin enough to hear every shout from the street below. There was no space, no privacy, but there was rhythm. Reggie woke at 5 a.m. every day, made instant coffee, then opened the shop by 6. The boy learned to pour oil before he learned to read. On weekends, he swept the bays, handing his father wrenches and sockets, watching him fix engines like a surgeon working on hearts. Reggie never talked much, but when he did, it meant something. The neighborhood was rough, as they said on the news, but to the boy, it was just home. Concrete sidewalks with cracks that looked like veins, chain-link fences surrounding empty lots that used to be homes, police cars patrolling like sharks. Gunshots at night were common enough to ignore. The schools were underfunded, the teachers tired, the books torn. But none of that mattered when he had a ball in his hand. Basketball wasn't just an escape, it was an identity. He got his first basketball from a neighbor's trash bin. Its leather was cracked and it didn't bounce right. But to him, it was perfect. He drew a makeshift hoop on the brick wall behind the auto shop, used a bent wire hanger for the rim. He practiced for hours, shooting from every angle, rebounding his own misses, imagining the crowd, the buzzer, the win. He played in boots, in socks, sometimes barefoot when shoes were a luxury they couldn't afford. In elementary school, teachers noticed his energy, his inability to sit still, his obsession with movement. Reggie refused to medicate him. He said the boy didn't need pills. He needed purpose. That purpose became basketball. Every morning before school, he ran drills by himself on the cracked court 3 blocks away, even in snow. He dribbled through puddles, trained with rocks when cones were too expensive. He mimicked moves he saw on TV, but no one taught him how to play. He taught himself, through repetition, frustration, and raw hunger. By age 10, he could outshoot kids twice his age. By 12, he was outrunning grown men at the local park. But he wasn't arrogant. He was quiet, focused, obsessed. He didn't play for applause. He played because it was the only thing that made sense. While other kids hung out on corners, he stayed in the gym. When friends joined gangs, he declined without judgment. Basketball wasn't his hobby. It was his lifeline. Reggie noticed, though he rarely said anything. Instead of praise, he showed support in actions. He repaired his son's worn-out sneakers 3 times before buying new ones. He gave up lunch breaks to drive him to games, even if it meant losing a client. He built a makeshift weight bench out of a scrap metal so the boy could train. They didn't say, "I love you." They said it with silence and sacrifice. By middle school, the boy was known in the neighborhood. People started calling him Next. Coaches from better schools came by the auto shop with flyers and promises. Reggie didn't trust them. He told his son to stay sharp, stay humble, and never let compliments get louder than hard work. The boy listened. He didn't chase popularity, he chased improvement. He watched tapes of greats, paused and rewound until he could replicate every footwork pattern, every hesitation move, every release. High school changed everything. He made varsity as a freshman, and suddenly his name echoed beyond Cleveland. College scouts came to games with clipboards and cameras. Journalists wrote about his court vision, his explosiveness, his raw talent. But at home, nothing changed. He still shared a room with his father, still did homework on the shop counter while engines rumbled behind him, still took the bus after practice because they couldn't afford a car. They didn't talk about the future in dreamlike terms. They talked in goals. Get better. Stay focused. Don't let it slip. When he got his first recruiting letter from Duke, Reggie didn't smile. He nodded once and said, "Keep your feet on the ground." That was all the boy needed. At 17, he was ranked top 10 nationally. His games were streamed online. People started calling the shop, offering interviews, gear, deals. Reggie turned most of them down. He didn't want vultures around his boy. He wanted him to stay clean, stay sharp, stay whole. The boy agreed. Fame never seduced him. Only greatness did. The night before his final high school game, he stood in the dark gym, alone, shooting free throws until his arms gave out. Not because anyone was watching, but because that's what he did when he was nervous. That night, he scored 41 points, broke the school record, and led his team to the state title. Reggie was in the crowd, wearing the same mechanic's jacket he'd worn for a decade. When the buzzer sounded, the boy pointed to him. No words, just acknowledgement, a silent tribute. That summer, he committed to a Division I powerhouse, full scholarship, national spotlight, a chance to finally leave Cleveland behind. But as they packed his duffel bags, Reggie said one thing that stuck. "You can go anywhere," he said, "but don't forget where your game came from." He didn't. He never would. Because everything he had become, the footwork, the focus, the fire, had been born not in arenas or training camps, but behind a greasy shop, under streetlights, on cracked courts with no nets and no praise. He was raised by the game, and it never let him forget. College began like a dream, but moved like a storm. From the moment he stepped onto campus, everything accelerated. There were cameras waiting before he unpacked his bags, reporters asking questions before he met his teammates, and endorsement companies already sliding business cards across lunch tables. His name had become a brand before he ever touched the college hardwood. He was no longer just a kid from Cleveland. He was the next big thing, and everyone wanted a piece. The coaching staff treated him like a generational investment. They gave him a private locker, a personalized training plan, and a weekly nutritionist. His face was used in promotional posters. Ticket sales spiked. The media team followed him through workouts like a documentary crew. But none of that fazed him. He didn't come to college for cameras. He came to play, and play he did. From the first exhibition game, it was clear he was different. He didn't just score, he dominated. He didn't just play, he imposed rhythm, changed momentum, took command of the floor like a veteran in a freshman's body. Opposing crowds booed him. Analysts picked apart his every move. But under the lights, he came alive. He averaged over 20 points a game, led his team to an undefeated first month, and began trending on social media every time he dunked. NBA scouts filled courtside seats, whispering to agents, checking boxes on clipboards. Commentators used words like explosive, NBA ready, and franchise cornerstone. By mid-season, he was on the cover of national sports magazines. His coach began shielding him from the noise, but he didn't need protection. He kept his head down. He practiced harder than anyone. He watched tape at night while his roommates played video games. He trained when the gym was empty, long after team workouts ended. Despite the fame building around him, he kept calling his dad after every game. They didn't talk about stats. They talked about execution, mistakes, missed assignments. His father remained his compass, keeping him grounded in a world spinning faster every week. And though Reggie still worked the same shop back home, his voice carried weight like no endorsement ever could. The boy, now nearly a man, trusted no one's judgment more. By the time the conference tournament arrived, his legend was growing beyond campus. Opposing players tried to rattle him with trash talk and double teams, but he responded with precision. He didn't get emotional. He punished them with skill. In the semifinals, he dropped 35 points in 3 quarters. In the final, he hit the game winner at the buzzer, then calmly walked off the court as if he had expected it all along. The day after, he declared for the NBA draft. He sat beside his coach in front of a sea of cameras, announcing his decision with a calm certainty that made headlines. "Ready for the next level," they quoted him saying, and he was. Behind the scenes, agents began their chase. Sneaker companies called his dorm. Brands wanted his name on clothing, drinks, video games. He turned down most of them, not out of arrogance, but caution. His father's words echoed, "Don't sign your name to something you wouldn't want printed on your tombstone." Draft prep became his full-time job. He moved to Los Angeles for training. Private gyms, sports scientists, nutritionists, and former NBA legends mentoring him. Every day was a calculated grind. 5 a.m. lifts, endless drills, shooting until his fingers went numb. He studied playbooks from every team likely to draft him, learning systems before even knowing where he'd go. He treated his mind like his muscles. Both had to be game ready. The night of the draft felt surreal. He wore a custom-tailored suit, jet black with silver trim. His father sat beside him, stiff in a borrowed tux. The green room was full of energy, tension, and manufactured smiles. The cameras caught everything. The anticipation, the nerves, the branding. When the commissioner stepped to the podium and called his name, the room exploded. But he didn't cry. He stood slowly, hugged Reggie tightly, and walked the stage like a soldier heading to war. This wasn't an end. This was a beginning. The team that selected him was rebuilding, hungry for a star. He was introduced at a press conference the next day, holding up a jersey with his name on it, the number he'd always dreamed of. Reporters asked about pressure, about comparisons, about money. He gave them what they needed. Poised answers, humble tone, sharp eyes. But in his heart, he was already thinking about practice, about winning, about proving he wasn't just hype. His first few weeks in the league were a whirlwind. He moved into a high-rise apartment, met teammates, signed autographs, shot commercials. But he kept the routine: early mornings, late nights, focused nutrition, film study. He respected veterans, absorbed knowledge, kept quiet in the locker room but loud on the court. Then came the preseason, his first taste of professional-level competition. Bigger bodies, smarter defenders, faster pace. But he adjusted quickly. The game slowed down in his hands. He used angles others didn't see. And when the regular season tipped off, he was in the starting lineup. Rare for a rookie, but earned. By mid-season, he was averaging more minutes than anyone expected. Analysts praised his court vision. Coaches raved about his work ethic. He became a fan favorite. Signed jerseys sold out. Kids lined up at arenas wearing his number. But through it all, he remained focused. He remembered where he came from, and most importantly, he remembered the promise he made to himself and his father. When he received his first NBA paycheck, he didn't call a realtor for himself. He called one for his dad. He wanted to buy Reggie a house, the kind with a porch, space to breathe, a kitchen big enough to cook something besides microwave meals. He toured properties quietly, without media attention, and when he found it, he paid in full. The house was more than brick and mortar. It was a thank you note written in granite countertops and high ceilings. It was for the nights Reggie went without dinner so his son could eat, for the shoes he fixed instead of replacing, for the cold winters he endured with a broken heater. It was everything they never had, now finally theirs. The handover was simple, a driveway, a handshake. Reggie, stunned silent. The boy who used to sleep on a mattress in the corner of the shop had become a man who could give his father a mansion. He didn't need applause. He had Reggie's nod. That was enough. Later that day, he laced up his sneakers for the biggest game of his rookie season. Confidence burned in his chest. He had arrived. He had given back. And the future stretched out ahead of him, bright and wide like the open court. What he didn't know was how quickly it would all change. But for that moment, just one fleeting moment, he had it all. The arena was electric. It was the kind of night every young player dreams about. The start of the playoffs, lights blazing, fans chanting, cameras flashing like fireworks. He walked onto the court with headphones on, blocking out the noise, keeping his pulse steady. But inside, he felt it. Not nerves, but purpose. That morning, he had handed his father the keys to the mansion. Now he was about to step into the national spotlight for the first postseason of his professional career. Everything seemed to align. It was as if the universe had finally given him the moment he'd been chasing since that first cracked basketball behind the auto shop. The game started like a storybook. His feet were light, his vision sharp, his decisions automatic. Every movement felt effortless. Fast breaks, precise assists, clean three-pointers. Commentators marveled at his composure. His name trended online within minutes of tip-off. Fans shouted with every possession. Coaches nodded with approval. He wasn't just holding his own, he was controlling the pace, dictating the rhythm. It felt like everything he had worked for was finally meeting the moment. No resistance, no wait, just flight. Midway through the third quarter, the game shifted. The score was close, the tension thick. The team called a fast break, a play he had executed hundreds of times before. He received the outlet pass near half court, two defenders on his heels. He drove left, crossed over right, and planted his foot hard to accelerate. That's when it happened. A sharp, unnatural twist, a sudden loss of control, a sound, not from the crowd or court, but from within. It was deep, like something tearing beneath the skin, a sound only he could hear and one he would never forget. His body gave out before he knew what happened. He collapsed mid-stride, sliding across the court as the ball rolled out of bounds. At first there was silence. The crowd, the teammates, even the broadcasters paused. Then came the gasps, the rising noise, the scramble of trainers sprinting across the floor. He lay there, frozen, staring up at the lights, not in confusion, but in a quiet, immediate understanding. He knew what had happened. Not a cramp, not a sprain. Something worse, something structural, something final. They helped him up, but he couldn't walk. He couldn't even put pressure on the leg. The pain was sharp, but not overwhelming. What broke him wasn't the physical impact. It was the timing. Hours earlier, he had watched his father walk through the mansion's doorway for the first time. Now, as he was carried off the court, his father stood again, this time in the luxury box, hands pressed against the glass, helpless. The locker room was cold. The MRI came fast. The team doctor didn't sugarcoat it. Complete ACL tear. Recovery, 9 to 12 months minimum. No playoffs, no summer training camp, no guarantees. The news didn't surprise him. He already knew. Still, hearing it aloud turned something inside him to stone. He stared at the ceiling, unmoving, his phone buzzing beside him with messages he didn't want to read. The media found out within the hour. Headlines hit hard. Rookie sensation suffers devastating injury. Playoff hopes crushed. The fall of a rising star. The world, so quick to lift him up, now watched him fall with the same fascination. Pundits debated his future on national television. Anonymous sources whispered about fragility. Fans flooded forums with prayers, predictions, and cynicism. He watched it unfold from a hotel room, leg in a brace, mind in a fog. He tried to stay present, but every noise outside his door felt like a reminder of what he was missing. The team moved on. Rotations changed, press coverage shifted, game plans adjusted. He became an afterthought in real time. Even well-meaning teammates struggled to look him in the eye. Everyone had a job to do, and his job, for now, was to sit still and heal. The mansion, once a symbol of victory, became a place of silence. He stayed there through the early weeks of recovery, unable to return to the team, unwilling to return to the city. The house was beautiful, vaulted ceilings, granite counters, polished hardwood floors, but it felt empty. Each room echoed too loud. The space was designed for celebration, for movement, for joy. But now it was a cage. Reggie tried to fill the void with conversation, with encouragement, with food. But his son remained distant, locked behind a quiet frustration. He didn't want sympathy. He didn't want comfort. He wanted what he had lost: control, momentum, the rhythm of a life always moving forward. But now that rhythm had stopped. The court felt 1,000 miles away. The only steps he could take were from the living room to the physical therapist's van that came twice a week. He followed instructions. He did the stretches. He watched film. But the fire dimmed. He was used to fighting from the bottom. This was different. This was falling from the top. He had already escaped the gravity of his circumstances once. Poverty, abandonment, small expectations. Now, he feared being dragged back down by an injury. Not because of pain, but because of perception. They would say he was fragile. They would say he peaked too early. They would say the dream was a moment, not a legacy. But in the quiet moments, late at night, when the pain throbbed and the world slept, he remembered who he was, not the brand. Not the prospect, not the rookie. He was the kid who shot at wire hoops and ran suicides in snow. The boy who played barefoot if he had to. The son who promised his father something bigger than survival. That boy hadn't vanished. He was hurt, yes, but not gone. So he began to write. Not for the media, not for fame, but for himself. Pages filled with goals, reflections, small victories. He tracked every degree of movement in his knee, every pain-free day. He drew diagrams of the court. He imagined new plays. He found purpose not in being watched, but in watching himself grow, inch by inch, quiet as a breath. And slowly, something returned. Not speed, not power, but clarity. The fall had come, yes, but he was still there, still breathing, still able to rebuild. The climb back up wouldn't be easy. It would take everything he had. But this time, he would do it with eyes wide open, not just for the spotlight, but for something deeper, something earned, something lasting. The flight may have paused, but it hadn't ended, not yet. The mansion stood in stillness, quiet as a chapel, untouched by the noise of the outside world. In the days following the injury, the house became less of a gift and more of a sanctuary he hadn't asked for. The marble floors that once gleamed with victory now echoed with the slow rhythm of crutches. The vaulted ceilings did nothing to dampen the emptiness that filled each room. Even the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the staircase, or the distant sounds of birds outside the tinted windows did little to remind him that life was continuing. For him, it had paused, frozen at the moment his knee gave out under the weight of expectation. He moved carefully, deliberately. The days were long and uniform. Morning rehab, light stretching, Ice packs, silence. No practices, no game film to review, no texts from coaches, no team briefings. He stopped checking his phone. Messages had dwindled to a trickle, mostly polite condolences from teammates and sponsors, some generic quotes of encouragement. The fanfare faded as fast as it had arrived. What remained was the reality. An elite athlete sidelined, stripped of motion, in a house that felt too big for one man and his brace. His father tried to fill the space with activity. Reggie cooked breakfast, wiped counters, paced the hallway. He mowed the lawn even when it didn't need cutting, tuned up cars in the oversized garage, offered small talk that never quite landed. But the young man spoke little. His responses were short, his focus internal. Pain meds dulled the edges of his mind. Physical discomfort was manageable. The mental weight pressed harder. For someone who had been moving his entire life, running, jumping, climbing out of circumstances, stillness felt unnatural, unforgiving. He sat in the oversized leather chair in the living room most afternoons, knee elevated, the television flickering in front of him with games he couldn't play. He watched his team continue their playoff run without him. They adjusted, found new rhythms, and filled the gap he left behind. The commentators mentioned him less with each game. The screen showed highlights of others, young players making their own names, hungry faces stepping into the spotlight he once owned. He tried not to resent them, but it stung. Every fast break was a reminder, every dunk a ghost of his former self. The mansion had rooms he hadn't entered yet, guest suites, a home theater, a gym with equipment still wrapped in plastic. The kitchen had appliances he didn't know how to use. He ate little, mostly toast, fruit, whatever Reggie brought upstairs. At night, he lay in a king-size bed staring at the ceiling fan, spinning in endless circles like his thoughts. Sleep came only in short bursts. Dreams were fragmented, memories of the court, of childhood, of falling. Over and over he fell. Time blurred. He marked the days not by dates, but by physical milestones. The day he could bend the knee 10 degrees, the day the swelling subsided, the first time he put weight on it again. These small victories were sacred, though invisible to the outside world. They were proof that he was still in motion, however slow. He clung to them, wrote them down, not for anyone else, but as a record that he still mattered. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, gated, landscaped, insulated from the world he knew. There were no kids playing on the street, no blaring music, no corner stores buzzing with life. Just hedges, stone driveways, and neighbors who waved politely from a distance. It was safe. It was everything he had once promised his father they'd reach. But now it felt sterile, disconnected from the rawness that had forged him. The mansion was beautiful, yes, but beauty didn't soothe his restlessness. Reggie began spending more time in the garage. He tuned up old engines, got oil beneath his nails again. It grounded him. He invited old friends over, kept the shop spirit alive in the back of the house. But he never stopped watching his son, never stopped hovering just far enough not to intrude. He knew the silence his boy carried. He had lived it once too. Pride turned inward becomes isolation, and grief, when unspoken, calcifies. One evening, weeks into the silence, the young man wheeled himself into the hallway lined with framed photos, shots of the draft, his high school championships, a newspaper clipping from his first college game. He stared at them one by one, looking at a version of himself that felt distant. The smiling kid with wide eyes, the rookie shaking hands with the commissioner, the boy gripping a ball with scuffed fingers and boundless ambition. Who was he now, without movement, without adrenaline, without headlines? He tried journaling. One page turned into 2, then 5. He didn't write about basketball. He wrote about fear, about what it meant to be seen, then forgotten, about what it meant to achieve a dream only to watch it fracture in real time, about the guilt of not feeling joy in a mansion bought with sweat and sacrifice, about the strange hollowness that came with success when it arrived too fast to carry. There were days he didn't want to rehab. Days he stared at the ceiling until noon, legs stiff, mind heavier. Reggie never pushed. He simply left a towel, a water bottle, a reminder that progress waited at the edge of pain. And eventually the young man moved again, slowly, mechanically. Not with the fury of competition, but the stubbornness of someone refusing to vanish. He began walking the perimeter of the property. One lap became two. Eventually, he could navigate the hallway without crutches. Then the stairs. The silence in the mansion softened. Not with music or noise, but with intention. He began reading, studying the game from a new angle. He dissected plays, learned analytics, mentored high school kids over Zoom. He started rebuilding not just his knee, but his mind, his identity. He wasn't just a player anymore. He was a survivor, a thinker, a man who knew that silence doesn't mean absence. It means listening. The mansion was no longer a monument to what he had earned. It became a forge, shaping what he would become. And though he wasn't ready yet to step back on the court, he knew one thing for certain. His story wasn't over. It was just paused, waiting for the next move. And when that move came, it would not be rushed. It would be deliberate, precise, born from stillness and shaped by silence. He didn't mark his comeback by a date circled on a calendar. He marked it by breath, by motion, by the quiet decision to rise each morning and do one more rep than the day before. Rebuild mode didn't begin in a gym under spotlights or in front of a crowd. It began on the cold tile of his bathroom floor at dawn, when the world was still asleep, and the pain in his knee pulsed like a distant drumbeat. It began the first time he stood without crutches and took 3 shaky steps toward the hallway mirror. It began when he looked into his own eyes and saw not a star or a rookie or a cautionary tale, but a man beginning again. His days became rituals, simple, consistent, grueling. Wake, stretch, ice, walk, eat, repeat. Physical therapy moved from the house to a private facility. There were no cameras, no reporters, just him and a trainer with calloused hands and the kind of voice that didn't care about fame. They started slow, isolated muscle movements, low resistance, endless measurements. Every millimeter of progress was celebrated, every setback recorded without drama. The body didn't care who he used to be. It only responded to discipline. The glitz of the league was gone. In its place, sweat, patience, and humility. The mental part was harder. The fear of re-injury clung to his every movement. Each small ache made him pause, unsure whether it was recovery or warning. He watched footage of himself pre-injury with mixed feelings. Admiration, sadness, disbelief. That player had moved like water, unburdened, wild with potential. Now he was grounded, heavier somehow, not just in the body, but in the soul. But with that heaviness came something new, wisdom. He wasn't playing to impress anymore. He was playing to reclaim something essential, something internal. Outside of rehab, he stayed mostly out of the public eye. Social media accounts went quiet. He declined interviews. He wanted the next chapter to be built in silence, not speculation. But he didn't isolate. He started mentoring local kids at a community gym near where he'd grown up. He walked with a limp, but when he demonstrated footwork or ball control, the respect in their eyes lit the room. He saw reflections of himself in those kids, raw, restless, searching for direction. Their hunger reminded him of what he once ran on before contracts and endorsements dulled the edge. Working with them wasn't charity, it was survival. It reminded him why he started. As the months passed, he moved from rehab into full training. Slowly, his old habits returned. He worked on his shot first, building from the ground up. Foot positioning, shoulder alignment, follow-through. Then came cardio, slow runs, bike work, hill climbs. Finally, cutting and lateral movement. Each phase brought pain, but also progress. He fell often, but not in defeat. He fell because he was testing the edge, pushing the limits again. The team stayed in touch. Coaches called to check in. The front office sent trainers. There was no pressure, no rush, just curiosity. Was he still the player they had drafted? Was the promise still alive beneath the scar? He answered with film. He sent progress clips, detailed recovery notes, scans, and reports. He wanted them to know he was doing this the right way, not out of desperation, but preparation. Off the court, his world also changed. He reconnected with old friends he hadn't spoken to since high school. Spent quiet evenings with his father, no longer just father and son, but two men who had weathered the storm together. They talked more, laughed more. The silence that had once filled the mansion had softened. It was no longer haunted. It was lived in, real. He also began therapy, not physical, but emotional. He sat in a room with someone who asked questions that had nothing to do with basketball, questions about identity, about fear, about worth beyond performance. At first he resisted, but over time he opened. He spoke about the pressure, the loneliness, the terror of irrelevance. And in those conversations, he shed the armor he didn't know he'd been wearing. He realized that his injury wasn't just to his knee, it had split him open. And what emerged wasn't just an athlete trying to return. It was a man trying to understand who he truly was when the applause faded. 9 months into recovery, he got clearance for contact drills. He returned to the team's practice facility quietly, slipping through a side door in the early hours before most of the roster arrived. The gym felt different. The floorboards sounded sharper, the rim looked higher. He stepped onto the court and stood for a long moment, inhaling the familiar scent of sweat and pine resin. Then he moved. First slowly, then faster, until the rhythm found him again. His first dunk wasn't clean, but it was enough. Enough to know he still had it. His teammates welcomed him back without fanfare. There were nods, handshakes, a few backslaps. Nothing more. He didn't want more. He didn't want to be celebrated for returning. He wanted to earn his place again. And so, he worked like a rookie, staying late, running drills twice, reviewing tape until the janitors turned off the lights. Preseason loomed. The coaches weren't sure if he was ready. He didn't push. He didn't ask. He just showed them every day that he could be counted on. Slowly, they increased his minutes, let him run in scrimmages. And when he finally put on his jersey again for a preseason exhibition game, there was no grand announcement, no tribute video, just a player, back on the floor, hungry. He scored modestly, nothing flashy. A few assists, strong defense, one three-pointer that rattled in off the glass. But he felt it, not the need to dominate, but the joy of belonging. The fear didn't vanish. It never would completely. But it no longer ruled him. In its place was something steadier, acceptance, determination, growth. He walked off the court that night not as a star returning, but as a man continuing. There was no finish line, no arrival, just one more step in the rebuild. And he had learned to love the process, not just the highlights, but the slow grind, the setbacks, the rediscovery. Because sometimes the most important victories don't come in games. They come in the quiet mornings, in the rehab room, in the spaces where no one is watching, where you choose, again and again, to rise. The season resumed, and with it came the rhythm of airports, shoot-arounds, post-game interviews, and the nightly grind of an 82-game schedule. He returned not as the face of the franchise, not yet, but as a role player, a utility guard with limited minutes and even more limited expectations. The world had moved on during his injury. New stars had emerged. The headlines belonged to others, but he didn't mind. He wasn't playing to be seen anymore. He was playing to belong, to contribute, to feel the hardwood under his sneakers, and the weight of the game in his lungs again. Each night, he came off the bench with quiet ferocity. His defense was sharp, his passes precise, his court vision better than ever. He no longer played to dominate, but to elevate those around him. He spoke more in huddles, mentored the rookies, and stayed long after practices ended to shoot in silence. Coaches noticed. Teammates followed his lead, and slowly, trust returned. Not the kind earned by highlight reels, but the kind that grows in locker rooms and film sessions. Respect built on consistency, accountability, humility. Off the court, his life had changed even more. The mansion no longer served as a trophy case or silent monument. It had become a home. Reggie had planted a garden in the backyard, rows of tomatoes and peppers that reminded them both of the neighborhood lot they used to pass walking to the bus stop. On weekends, his father grilled ribs and played old records, and sometimes the young man would sit in a lawn chair with his brace off, feeling the grass beneath his feet and the weight of time shifting. He started showing up at the community gym again, not for rehab, but to coach. The kids were older now, some taller than him. He organized drills, ran clinics, brought in teammates when he could. He never announced his visits. He just appeared, like clockwork, early on Saturdays, a whistle around his neck and a towel over his shoulder. The gym wasn't air-conditioned. The nets were torn, but it was alive. And in that cracked floor and scuffed paint, he found a different kind of court. One where legacy wasn't measured in points or trophies, but in who you showed up for when no one was keeping score. He launched a foundation quietly, funded with part of his rookie contract and bolstered by donations he never publicized. It focused on after-school programs, scholarships, therapy access for young athletes, resources he never had but always needed. He visited schools, sometimes just to listen. He didn't preach or pose. He shared his story, not the glossy version, but the real one, about failure, about pressure, about the silence that follows the fall. The kids listened. Some cried. Most just nodded. They understood. Media started to take notice, but he never leaned into the attention. When journalists asked about his philanthropy, he deflected. "I'm just doing my part," he'd say. And that was true. He didn't want to be famous for giving back. He wanted to make giving back normal. Back in the league, his minutes remained modest, but his presence grew. He was often the first off the bench to high-five teammates, the last to leave the team plane, the quiet glue between egos and youth. Coaches began to trust him in clutch moments, not because of explosive stats, but because he didn't rattle. His calm became contagious. He wasn't the rising star anymore. He was something rarer, reliable. As his third season approached, whispers of a contract extension surfaced. Not max money, but fair, solid, enough to secure his future. He didn't rush the deal. He let his agent handle the numbers. What mattered more was something else, a meeting he had scheduled with the league's youth advisory board. They'd invited him to help design a new mentorship pipeline for young players entering the draft system. The league had noticed what his team already knew. This man understood the game on two levels, the one between the lines and the one beneath the surface. He flew out that weekend not in a suit, but in sweats, carrying a spiral notebook filled with scribbled ideas. He didn't come to impress. He came to fix what he wished had been in place for him when he entered the league with a million expectations and no roadmap for what would happen when things fell apart. In that boardroom, surrounded by executives and former players, he spoke clearly. Not emotionally, but with lived truth. He talked about injury, identity, pressure, and silence. He offered ideas not drawn from textbooks, but from hospital beds, ice baths, therapy chairs, and long walks through empty hallways. When he left the meeting, he didn't wait for applause. He walked back to his hotel, ordered room service, and called Reggie just to talk about the garden. That was the new rhythm. Give, grow, rest, repeat. By the time playoffs returned, he was stronger than ever. Not in stats, but in stamina, in wisdom. He played his minutes without waste. His body no longer moved the same way, but it moved smarter. He anticipated better, saw plays before they unfolded. He knew when to take the shot and when to pass. And during a pivotal series when the starter went down mid-game, the coach didn't hesitate. He pointed across the bench, not to the most hyped player, but to the one who had earned every inch of his return. He stepped onto the court, not with nerves, but with clarity. The game slowed down. His feet knew where to go, his hands what to do. He didn't chase a legacy anymore. He lived it. That night, he made the game-winning assist. Not a shot, not a dunk, but a pass. A perfect, selfless pass. And when the buzzer sounded, he raised one finger to the sky. Not for the win, but for the journey. After the game, reporters crowded him again. Asked about redemption, comebacks, pain. He smiled and gave them what they wanted, but when he got home that night, back in the mansion that now smelled of fresh soil and barbecue, he wrote a single line in his journal. I finally understand the other court. It wasn't about the game under the lights. It was the one behind closed doors, where character is built, where silence teaches, where rebuilding means more than recovery. The other court is life, and in that arena, he had already won.